The Birmingham Bombing by Jessica Pong and Nikki Rubino. Background info on Birmingham and the church. Birmingham, Alabama was one of the most segregated cities in the U.S. in the 60s. The city had no black police officers, firefighters, sales clerks, and very few black citizens were allowed to vote. Blacks were normally the first to go during layoffs, which made unemployment rates for them 2.5 times higher. The average income for blacks were also less than half of the average income of whites. The 16th Street Baptist Church was the first colored Baptist church organized in 1873. The church was completed in 1911 and the total cost to build the church was $26,000. Many annual meetings were held there for important activities for the black citizens in the city. Many people like Martin Luther King Jr., W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary McLeod Bethune, Paul Robeson, and Ralph Bunche spoke at the church in the earlier years. Many civil rights mass meetings were held there. A few students would choose to go to the church rather than to go to school. However, the church received many threats. The KKK would call in bomb threats to disrupt annual civil rights meetings. Black institution bombings were very common. What happened? On September 15, 1963, at 10:22 a.m., a dynamite bomb blew up in the front steps of the church. Many church members were inside to attend a Sunday school class. Many parts of the interior walls were caved in and almost all the windows had been shattered. A survivor says they saw the kids' bodies propel up into the air. The size of a hole the explosion blew into the rear wall was around 7 feet in diameter. It also created a 5-foot-wide crater in the ladies' basement. 4 young girls were inside of the church and were killed from the blast. Addie Mae Collins, who was 14 years old, Carol Denise McNair, who was also 14 years old, Cynthia Wesley, who was 14 years old, and Carol Denise McNair, who was 11 years old, were all pronounced dead at the Hillman Emergency Clinic. Over 20 people were injured from the explosion. Addie Mae Collins' younger sister, Sarah Collins, who was 12 years old, had around 21 pieces of glass stuck in her face, causing her to go blind in her right eye. After this, around 2,000 black people came hysterical and desperately looking to find loved ones. The KKK members who started the bombings were Thomas Edwin Blankton, Jr., Herman Cash, Robert Chambliss, and Robert Cherry.
Immediate aftermath. The day after the bombing on September 16, 1963, President John F. Kennedy responds, "If these cruel and tragic events can only awaken that city and state, if they can only awaken this entire nation to a realization of the folly of racial injustice and hatred and violence, then it is not too late for all concerned to unite in steps toward peaceful progress before more lives are lost." The death of the 4 young girls was a major realization of racial prejudice and discrimination. Funerals were held for the 4 victims, but one family chose to keep their ceremony private. Martin Luther King Jr. attended and gave condolences to the victims' families. He mentions how there is social injustice taking place in the world and that the government is responsible for a majority of it. He states, "The blood of 4 little children are on your hands. Your irresponsible and misguided actions have created in Birmingham, Alabama, the atmosphere that has induced continued violence and now murder." Many people attended the ceremonies, including a woman named Joanne Mulholland, a former freedom rider who was a white student enrolled at a historically black Tougaloo college in Mississippi. She and a VW busload of her classmates come to Birmingham to bear witness to try to understand. She says of the 4 victims, they were so innocent. Why them? She says how Birmingham was a peaceful place until the church bombing. "Things had been so beautiful," Mulholland remembers, "and now it was worse than normal. The explosion claimed the lives of the 4 girls, injured 22 others, and set off a wave of violence in Birmingham." This was the 3rd bombing that occurred over a period of 11 days. African Americans rushed to the scene of the crime, protesters littered the streets, and riots broke out due to the outcry. 2 black boys were even shot to death, and Governor George Wallace readied the Alabama National Guard. Johnny Robinson, a 16-year-old Negro, was shot in the back and killed by a policeman with a shotgun. Officers said the victim was among a group that threw stones at white youths driving through the area in cars flying Confederate battle flags. When the police arrived, the youths fled, and one policeman said he had fired low, but some of the shot had struck the Robinson youth in the back. Virgil Wade, a 13-year-old Negro, was shot and killed just outside Birmingham while riding a bicycle. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office said there apparently was no reason at all for the killing, but indicated that it was related to the general racial disorders. Another Negro youth and a white youth were shot but not seriously wounded in separate incidents. 4 whites, including a honeymooning couple from Chicago, were injured by stones while driving through the neighborhood of the bombing. Once the violence had settled, Joanne Mullen stopped at the ruined 16th Street Church, picking up shards of stained glass. She donated and kept some for teaching tools. The KKK members had gone away with it, or so they thought. Modern results. Following a tainted investigation by the FBI, Robert Chambliss, an active member of the KKK, was arrested and charged with murder and the possession of dynamite without a permit. 2 additional conspirators, Thomas Blanton and Robert Cherry, have been tried and convicted for their roles in the church bombing. The purpose of the bombing was to stall the civil rights activities, but because it was such an outroar, it had an opposite effect and legislations were passed sooner. The bombing brought the civil rights movement home to a lot more people, says Mullen. More than $300,000 were contributed for the restoration of the damaged church. It was reopened for services Sunday, June 7, 1964. A special memorial gift, a large stained glass window of the image of a black crucified Christ, was given by the people of Wales, designed by John Petts. To this day, the church is still used for mass and government-held meetings. It is a historic landmark that many people across the world come to remember, the major event of racial discrimination and the legislations that were passed in response.